dumbbell of whatever happens, can they lift it more easily?
Exactly.
So then it goes down to the fact of how are we defining what's happening to us and how quick are we able to do it. It's easier for us to do it on the tail end, right? Like when you're going through something,
Yeah.
right? When you come out the other end, it's easier to look back and say, oh, that makes sense. That's the easier part. The more challenging part is as you're going through to remain present and calm through the storm, knowing that after a storm, what usually happens? Flowers grow because of the rain.
Mm.
The more challenging part is how do you weather the storm? And then how do you define the moment that's happening to you? And it could be something simple. This person is acting a certain way towards me. This person doesn't want to be in my company, right? Let's just use the metaphor. I like to use the word company, not meaning a business. I like to use the word company of the company you keep, right? The word company is just based on a group of people.
For sure.
Right? If you look at, the military, 82nd Brigade, 3rd Company, right? Company is just a group of people. A business is now called a company because it's a group of people doing something, right? But the word company, like, you have company come over. Oh, you better get ready, go clean your room. We got company coming.
Exactly.
It just means a group of people. So, you know what? There's going to be people that decide that they don't want to be in your company. They don't want you in their company, whatever the situation might be. And that company could be an actual business, whether it be, we've all gotten fired from, jobs before, or they didn't want us in their company. It is what it is. But how do we take those situations and define them in our minds as we're going through it? And I think that's the challenging part. Then once you're able to define a moment to the best of your ability, then how do you look back to points in your life and say, that was a defining moment? That moment right there, when I decided to leave corporate America. That moment right there, when I decided I was going to pack everything up and drive to Texas, not knowing where I was going to stay and, staying in someone's spare room, right? What were those defining moments, and how do we identify them more easily? And especially if we're there, present, that's the goal. How do we build that wisdom muscle to the point where we could be in a defining moment and think to ourselves, this is a defining moment. Right now, the decision that I make is going to be pivotal to the rest of my life. And I'm going to take it with the gravity that it deserves. Yeah, I like that. The gravity that it deserves, right? Because I think there's a lot of things that we give too much gravity to, right? There's a lot of people out there that put so much gravity into what car they drive. Who gives a shit? You know what I mean? Like, do you enjoy it? Do you this, that? Is it functional? Is it fun? Do you get joy just from the sound of the engine? Good for you, whatever it is. But I think sometimes people put too much gravity on things that at the end of the day don't mean much. But how do we get to the point of being able to define those moments and then be able to discern when it's not just defining moments, but it is a defining moment in your life, and sit in it, give it the gravity it deserves, and keep moving forward.
I like that. It took me on a journey of thought, and I wrote down quite a bit of notes. Great, a lot of points, a lot of things to dissect and unpack and kind of compartmentalize some of those messages that you had in there. And what you said at the end sparked something in me, because you said a defining moment, right? Amongst defining moments. And so I wrote something down towards the end of what you were saying, which is change and then application. And you're talking about wisdom. And so you're saying that we can go back retrospectively and identify moments and pivotal things that happened in our lives that we feel that we changed the most, impacted us, right? We felt a noticeable difference in the trajectory of our lives or our thought process or our emotions or something. Those were moments, right? And sometimes maybe something happened dramatically that forced us to stretch, forced us to think critically, forced us to be challenged, almost like, buried a little bit under pressure, but being able to overcome that, right? We didn't have a certainty on the other end. And I think we can define those moments of strength and endurance, when we look back at those times where we were tested and we passed the test. And so then we can identify, okay, so if we can look back and see those moments when we passed tests, now in order to direct and be a sailor of our ship and keep ourselves on a certain path, right?
Mhm.
Without wavering too much, taking too long to get to the destination. I think that timetable of how long it takes us to get to the destination is the culmination of experience that we've obtained from going back and reviewing the film from those past tests. So it's like, hey, what mindset was I in? What thought process was I in? What did I have to do? Even if you take it from a confident thing, like what did I have to do in those moments to overcome those moments in a
Mhm.
successful way? And
Mhm.
so then having the discernment to now, once you're steering and you come across another storm is coming, you're like, oh. And so you might be in life and up against another challenge, right? Whether it's career, whether it's a relationship, whether it's anything or
Mhm.
everything, you might be faced with that challenge. So now in that time, how do we leverage the discernment which you connected to wisdom to then now flash forward and say, okay, I was here before and I felt this feeling, right? So now let me leverage some of the same type of thought process and energy that I used before. And I
Mhm.
think that's how we can use that as a tool. And that's how we get better with time, right? We get more efficient with time. We get more productive, right? We can do things, accomplish and achieve tasks with a fraction of the time it takes. And so we can move faster, right?
Mhm.
And so we can accomplish things faster. And I think it's all about leveraging the wisdom, like you said about it.
Mhm.
Now you mentioned something. You said entry level PD, like to us, things don't happen to us; they happen for us, right?
Mhm.
And that made me think about some of those teachings, like The Secret and As a Man Thinketh, and it's all about controlling thought patterns and keeping yourself on the right track. And I think about, okay, so we're talking about defining moments and getting off track. And then we're talking about just mentally processing the happenings of life in a way in which it's beneficial to the outcome always.
Mhm.
I think sometimes when we get lost a little bit, we no longer are looking at what's happening to us as it's happening for us. And so we might spend a lot of time drifting off of the path. Why me? Why me? Why is this? Why is this? Why? Where'd this come from? Why do
Mhm.
I deserve? Versus I can't change this. This is a part of what's in the way of the journey in which I'm going. So I
Sure.
have to learn how to take it with me. And I
Right.
have to learn how to maximize it and use it and leverage it. Right. And I think a lot of that is just mental control. But I'll toss the rock back to you.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about the building blocks and what some of those, first steps, you're saying like, oh, it's the first step
Right.
to personal development. One of the word that came to mind when you were saying was the word cornerstone,
Mm.
right? So the idea of like, what's a cornerstone? So when you put up a building, right, and they start with one block,
Yep.
the cornerstone, right? So the thought is if that type of philosophy, that's the cornerstone that we can build off of,
Mm-hmm.
right? And a lot of those cornerstones come from religion, come because those are some of the earliest teachings
Yep.
that you also instill in children. So even if we look at what happens for you, what happens to you, not don't look what happens to you, what happens for you. The same could be said of a lot of Christian beliefs, right? Where it's like faith without works is dead, or oh ye of little faith, like
Mm-hmm.
have faith in, right? A lot of those biblical teachings are cornerstones of building a life on top of. And I think that quote is one of them, where it's a sort of why is this happening? And then those that are people of faith would be like, God has a plan. God wants me to go through this.
That's why faith is so powerful.
Exactly. So I think if we can see where personal development, self-development, biblical teachings, or just religious teachings in general, where they can all weave together, I like this word cornerstone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where there are many successful, where
A
there are many,
blueprint.
what was that?
Like a blueprint
A
almost.
blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
But and to even take that to the next level is that there are many high achievers in this world where you ask them, what is the cornerstone of your blueprint? Because the interesting word about blueprint is that it's malleable,
Right.
right? You can make whatever blueprint you want. You know what I mean? Like the same with your physicality. You want to feel and look like an athlete as opposed to a bodybuilder. You have the discipline and the knowledge, to be able to say, if you wanted to, you could probably put on 20, 30 pounds of muscle and be on stage and do that performance and get down to 6% body fat.
Mhm.
You could do it, but it's not the blueprint that you want to build.
That's a good point.
Right. So blueprints are malleable. They can be designed to the person that wants to live in that body.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you're designing that blueprint of a body that you want to live in the same way you could design that house that you want to live in. And then the question there is, what's the cornerstone of building anything? Is some type of, or is some foundation, some blocks. And that's where it can be interesting because it's, what are those blocks? What's a lot of times you hear it as like character, right? Like it's a part of their character, right? If a person doesn't have character, they can build and build and build and build. A storm comes through, it's over. It's over because it wasn't, and even in the Bible it says, ye who builds their house on sand, right? And that's a whole idea there too. If you don't have a foundation that you're building your house on, you build your foundation on sand, it's only a matter of time until it falls when you're going through a storm.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of, it doesn't happen to you, it happens for you.
Right.
How is that rooted in spiritual beliefs? How is that rooted in affirmations? How is that rooted in incantations of our, causing ourselves to change our state
for sure
when we need to?
Oh yeah.
Incantations of, Floyd Mayweather running.
Oh yeah. Hard work, dedication.
Hard work, dedication. Army of one. Hard work, dedication. Army of one. God's favorite. God's favorite. God's with me. Right.
Nobody can defeat me.
Nobody can defeat me. And a lot of those incantations, again, it goes back to the cornerstones. So what I would challenge all of us to think about is, have we defined what our cornerstones are? We define what the foundations are. Then we can start to build on top of it. So even as we're talking about defining moments and how do we identify the defining moments and how do we use the discernment? It's real easy to look in the rearview mirror and say, oh, okay, I see what happened back there. That's easy.
Right.
Compared to being able to look through the windshield and be able to take the time, like you said, to look back and be like, the last time I was driving, I see this curve coming up. But if you didn't take the time the last time you went through a similar curve to say, why did I go through wait, I spun out, I crashed, here and this, but I took the time to say, I went into the curve too fast. So what ends up happening is that, or in one theory is that, if you're an F1 fan, right? Like they walk the track before a race. Have you ever seen this? So F1 racers, it's a thing, and they're going at such speeds, and the track needs to be so perfectly curated that even the smallest rock, pebble,
can
completely.
Are you serious?
Completely, they're going 200 miles an hour.
Golly.
200 miles an hour.
Golly.
So now what they're doing is
sweepers have to get a lot of money.
The races, they're memorized. It's incredible. They'll do the memories. They'll visualize the race in their mind, and it's unbelievable. The tracks are memorized in their mind. If they can close their eyes and say, okay, coming up on turn 1, 37 degrees into the pole, coming out this way, next turn here, third, go up, shift up to 4. It's wild. They know every single curve of the track. And then before the race, day of, doesn't matter if they've driven the track 1,000 times, they walk the track, which is fascinating. Now, the theory there is when we first start driving a car, we're slowing down a lot when we come into that curve. Right. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you don't go into a curve too fast. Someone just starts driving and they come in and they're turning and you're like, all right, then you can accelerate through. You can accelerate through, right? That's probably the way. But it's like you're here, and then you kind of like hesitant. You can accelerate through, and the more you drive, the more you can say, "Oh, okay, no stop sign, no possibility of oncoming traffic. I can brake, but then I can accelerate through the curve." And then, so I took time to get a motorcycle license. I know how to ride motorcycles, not an expert by any means, but if you really want to take driving to the next level, it's how are you navigating even within the lane you're in, right? So when you learn to ride a motorcycle, you're positioning yourself within the lane. You're not just in the lane. And in fact, you're not even in the middle of the lane. Next time you're driving and you see motorcycle riders, notice they're never in the middle of a lane. They're always, if they can, slightly to the driver's side mirror so that the driver can see them than if they were just in the middle. Do you see what I mean? Because if they're a little to the more the driver's side, right?
That's smart.
The driver can see them a little bit in the driver's, and they still should be able to see them in the rear view mirror. But if you're just in the center and you're just the rear view mirror, there's only one mirror that they could possibly see you. Now, the other thing that they teach you is when you're going into turns, you go the opposite way of the turn before you go that way. So in other words, if I'm turning right, I'm of the lane, I'm going to move to the left side of the lane because it then allows me
more arc.
Exactly. It allows me to pivot and then go to the inside of the lane here. So I'm going to go to the outside of the lane and then I'm going to turn into the inside of the lane, right? But it's interesting. And when you think about it from a geometry perspective and a physics perspective, you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Here I am. I have a curve coming up. I'm going to move to this side. Now it allows me to turn through the turn and I'm going to aim towards this line. So I'm going to go here. And then interesting enough is you actually are pushing the opposite way that you want to go, which is very counterintuitive.
Interesting.
When you're riding a motorcycle, you want to go right, you push left.
Okay.
Because if you have the bars in front of you,
push left and then turns the wheel. Okay.
You're pushing left, which turns your wheel right.
Yeah.
So it's counterintuitive at first because you're thinking, I'm going to go right, I'm going to use my right arm. But you're going right, you want to push down on the left, which is then going to push you to the right. But you want to move within the lane. And then as you come, then you're going to push, you're going to cut through the lane and go then to the inside lane. Then once you come back out, now you come back to center and then go, then depending on what side of the lane you're in. I share all that to say in that I think there's a metaphor there. The more you go through different curves, the more you're able to think back and say, what did I do? What didn't I do? Riding a motorcycle is a very interesting life reflection. Very interesting life reflection.
Connect it.
Very interesting. Because there's much less room for error. Much less room for error. You are extremely connected to your senses. It's actually it's an incredible experience. It really is. Because you're connected to your senses at a higher level. There's no distractions. You're not Apple CarPlay. You're not like having a conversation with your lady and not like no. You are locked in to you and your life and almost your survival and your senses. And if you do without a helmet, it's even more because you're just the senses, everything, the air, the smell, the pressure against your body as you go faster. It's a wild experience. Right? When you're in a car and you accelerate, you feel the acceleration. But when you have that wind hitting your body, it's an incredible experience, and it gets you so associated with the senses. Now, I actually find it extremely tiring as well, because if you think about it, if you're driving a car and you're like, just driving, like cool, turn here, all right. But when you're riding a motorcycle, if wet ground, gravel is like the kryptonite of motorcycle riders. You know what I mean?
I'd imagine so.
Oh, because gravel, you're coming around a corner, whoosh, your wheels are gone. Your wheels are gone from underneath you. Oil, leaves, right? Other drivers that don't see you because they're used to these bigger animals on the road. So you're this little animal on the road, they don't see you, right? So your senses are elevated to the point that it's wild. These guys that can do it for 8, 9, 10 hours at a time, I don't know how they do it. I couldn't do it.
Yeah,
I could do an hour, and I'm like, man, like I'm physically exhausted, and I also know,
muscle.
Right, and I also know that it was because of my entry level experience. The more experience I get, the more they'd be like, oh, that's this, relax. Oh, that's this, relax.
Right.
But if you're into it and you're like, is that gravel? Is that a dog? Is that, you know what I mean? you come into it. Does this person see me? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So and you could do the same thing through life.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes, and I was driving as a very cautious motorcycle rider, like very cautious. So, it probably limited the experience that I had along the way, but that was the trade-off that I wanted to have when it came to the risk reward perspective. Maybe there's greater reward with greater risk, as in the majority of things in life, but I wasn't willing to go. I'm not trying to go 100 miles an hour on the highway to get to that point of reward of that feeling. I was good.
Yeah.
That was enough for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't need to go. There's plenty of people out there. They're like, cool. I like to go to roller coasters, but I'm good with skydiving. You know what I mean? Like, some people, like, I'm good with skydiving.
Yeah.
I don't need to go to that level and put that risk to be able to get that type of sensation. That's really up to a person.
It is. And, I say it all the time. People ask me, like, what do you think is thrilling? And I say, I'm a skydiver type of person. Like, I would do it. I would try to mitigate the risk as much as possible. I'm very selective on that experience, just because I highly, highly, highly value life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's less of fear and more of like an appreciation. Like, I don't want to play with it, because then if something does happen, I have nobody to blame, nothing to say other than your experience of life moving forward has now been dramatically altered because of you wanted one experience, one moment, one thrill. And so that's how I consider it. But yeah, definitely. I jump out of a plane over some water, like in Hawaii. I hear people do that in Hawaii over the beach. I totally do that.
Yeah. I've done skydiving. Yeah. I mean, I've done your tandem, hooked up to somebody. Yeah. And I've done it. It was fun.
Yeah. And I think about it all the time. And I've done like the rocket balls where they shoot you up in there, that kind of stuff with a cage around you. And so I get it. But even to that point you just made, right, that leads me to the primary point I was going to make, which is it made me think of a guide. And sometimes when you have someone who has taken the time to go through the experiences of how to develop that skill set, they can guide you appropriately now to maybe you don't need as many swings at base to become pretty efficient. Right? They could say, hey, tighten this, plant your back foot, fire your hip, keep your eye on the ball,
and learn from their mistakes.
Right.
I mean, and we could even learn from the mistakes of people that aren't here anymore.
100%. Yeah. And even I think like a journey through the jungle. You know what I mean? Sometimes you need a guide, right, who knows the terrain, has been through it a few times. Now, the unique thing about a guide, right, they're not just, blessed with the ability to figure things out on the fly. The guide is a guide because of the experience. They went through the lion, tigers, bears, and snakes, beetles, bugs, berries, and poisons. They already know, right, what to expect. So now they can assist you in making sure that you are aligning your boundaries appropriately, not to have so much risk that's associated to the reward. And so, like to you say you did that buddy system, right? Because that makes it a little bit less, right? So some things in life can be, I guess, embraced or enjoyed a little bit more with more control around the risk, and it's just about having self-control as a person. And I think that is something that does build with wisdom for sure.
Completely. And, as you're saying that, the word guide could be interchanged with mentor, right? And I think there's a big difference between mentor and coach.
Yeah.
But with mentor, it's someone that has been where you're going and could guide you. They don't have to be on the journey with you at that given moment, but they've taken that turn before, right? And they're like, all right, look, here's, but you have to be open to their guidance, right? And then be, all right, listen, going into this turn, what you want to do is brake, downshift, here. That's something that you might want to consider. And sometimes the guidance isn't necessarily telling you exactly what to do, but it's giving you an idea of what skills and tools you have to be better with the car you're driving. Maybe that guide was driving a different type of car through that turn. And they said, listen, I was driving a truck when I went through that, but now you're driving, you're driving a two-seater or a Porsche. It's going to be a lot different of an experience to go through that curve because we're all different people. We all have different skills. We all have access to different capabilities, and we all have different capacities.
Mhm.
You know, there are certain things from a capacity perspective that we're not all built alike. Even though there's a certain percentage of the population that wants to play the everyone's equal game, it's just not reality. Not everyone's equal. People have different capacities in different areas, and that's just how they were born. There are countless numbers of people out there whose capacity far exceeds my capacity in certain categories. And I'm sure that there's certain categories that my capacity of what I'm capable of doing far exceeds other people.
Mhm.
And it's okay and it's human to be able to say that's not the case. To think that everyone's capacity is identical
Mhm.
or that everyone's capabilities are identical. It's just, it's just not fact, right? There's no way someone that's born 5'5" is going to ever be able to jump and touch a point, on a wall that someone that's born 7 foot is. They just don't have that capacity in them. If they can work and work and work, and they can build their 5'5" body into its maximum capacity, but it doesn't mean that they will ever have that type of capacity of a Hussein Bolt, right? From a running perspective, but it's
Yeah,
maximizing
for maximizing. Yeah.
maximizing your capacity.
Yep.
We just can't, live in this fairy tale world that everyone's created equal and everyone is equal and all this. It's just a fairy tale. It's not the case. What should be taught is, look, figure out what your capacity is, figure out what your God-given capabilities are, figure out what your gift is, unwrap it, maximize the gift that you have. And when you figure out what it is that is your gift, and you have the capability of being exceptional at, then focus on that. Go all in. But when you first get on the field, play every position on the field until you finally realize, no, this is my position on the field, and then go all in on being that best version, and then align yourself with other people that then have the other skills that are needed that are not within your capacity. Rather than us just living in this fairy tale of everyone's created equal and this is great and don't worry about it, and you deserve this and you deserve that. Absolutely not. That's not the case. It takes that discernment, the wisdom. Look back, look at the situation. How do I define this moment, and then how do I figure out what moments are defining moments? Again, that's the differential that we started with in the beginning of the conversation. Was how do we define moments, and then how do we figure out what are defining moments, and how do we watch the film on defining moments to be able to say, how do I recognize a defining moment sooner so that I can act accordingly in the situation? Be like, oh, this is something. I remember the last time. I see that storm coming, but something's odd. You look quiet before the storm.
Mhm.
You ever look in the sky and you're like, it looks like it's going to rain.
Feel that little chilly breeze.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Something's up. You feel like it's going to rain? Okay. No problem. What did you do the last time?
Oh yeah.
What good things did you do? What bad things did you do? And then just continuing to push your capacity as far as you possibly can. And when you look at each person's capacity, being honest with them and being honest with yourself more,
Yeah.
right? I mean, let's not play the old school game of American Idol, where you had these people going on American Idol and they just don't have the capacity to be a singer at that level. But they were delusional. At the same time, I'm a firm believer in delusion. I think you should be delusional of what you believe your capacity is. That's the only way you're ever going to see where the top is, right? A person needs to think that they can jump 8 feet if they're ever going to get to the point of jumping 7 feet.
Yeah, you have to be able to believe what you cannot currently see that you can do. You can't do it. You have to be able to believe in something that's not seen or done
Absolutely.
at the moment. So
absolute and utter delusion.
It takes imagination too.
Completely. Imagine, and you need to be able to see it
Yep.
before anyone else does.
Mm.
And that is, as a matter of fact, I was just watching a reel just this morning, and I don't know, maybe he'll watch this one day too. A friend of mine, his name is Derek Fay, and he makes these reels that are great parables. It's funny because I think I sent it to you this morning.
Yep.
And it's he tells these stories, and the story was when Disney World was finally built. Walt Disney had already passed away by the time Disney World opened, not Disneyland, Disney World.
Right.
So there's a story where there are some executives walking through on the opening day, and Walt Disney's brother was there. I think his name is Roy. I think his name is Roy Disney. And he's going through, and there are some executives, and one of the executives looks over to Roy and he says, sure is a shame that Walt didn't live long enough to see this. And he looked back at him quick, shot back at him. He's like, oh, he saw this. He saw this before any of us did. It's only here because he saw it. Isn't it like a little goose, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Boom,
That's going.
boom.
Man, I like that.
Yeah,
that's
because it was
time.
like, no, he did see it.
Right.
It's only here because he saw it.
Facts.
And it was like, wow, like, how do we use that, and how do we look at an empty lot? Like an architect sees a building.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like a person that has studied engineering and craftsmanship can see the building.
For sure.
A person that has studied the human body can see the result of the work.
For sure.
Right? And how do you get the client or the whatever to be able to see what that end result could look like if they don't see it?
Facts.
Right? So, it's really interesting the way he, an artist is just a canvas.
Facts.
But they see the full thing on the canvas.
Facts.
Before it's there.
Big time.
Say, this is what it's going to look like.
Big time. And
now I'm going to start. And you're looking at them like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know how I'm going to get there either. But this is what it's going to look like.
It's going to be.
And they build it from there. And more of us need to do that. More of us need to tap into our imagination.
Big time.
To see things before they exist, and to have the courage to declare that they will.
That's a great word, and that leads me into the next point.
Mm-hmm.
Courage.
Mm-hmm.
Taking it back to defining moments.
Yes.
I was sitting here thinking, I always try to get to the root, right? I was trying to get to the root of anything and take it deeper and deeper and deeper. Like, I can take it deeper. And I'm like, defining moments. I'm like, how do we identify what those are? And I'm like, what's the process that we go through, and what do we try to search in our mind and body of a feeling to say, out of all these moments, which one are highlighting like a North Star? Which one's brighter?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's about the impact, going back to that word. And I try to think about myself for the moments, out of all of the moments that I would describe as defining. It probably was associated with some type of courage. And then I said, or associated with some type of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, then I want to look at that word define. So these are moments that now define who we are currently. Past moments defining who we currently are. Okay. So then I'm looking at, it is so critical in those moments on what direction you choose in said position, because I generally think what you're up against is courage and fear, and how you respond when you feel it, because courage is only courage because of the action you take past the fear. Everybody might feel that, but then it's what do you do? And I think if you go left and you succumb to fear and you belittle yourself, right? And you break yourself smaller, I think we remember those moments. I think those moments stick us as well. And we look back and we're like, I have a lot of shame around those moments. I got a lot of guilt around those moments. I think even guilt and shame, even the negative moments still hit and are defining. And so I think it's very wise to take the wisdom from those moments of sometime when we went left and we felt that negativity, to say, now I need to stand in courage. So now when I'm up against a challenge, or up against something that's unknown, or up against an uncertainty, or up against something that's bringing me a little bit of fear or angst, I need to be courageous. Because regardless of what direction I choose, to stand taller or to cower smaller, they're going to define my future self. And so now that discernment, we can go back to that word of when we're trying to identify and we're up against another test, another challenge in life, because it will not stop. We need the rain just as much as we need the sun. The life shows us how it's going to be a cyclical. We're going to come up against another storm. But now we nail it, right? We nail it to a pad to just say, hey, I have to choose courage. Now moving forward, when I'm up against a test, it's always more beneficial and advantageous to choose courage. Be courageous, because you're going to be feeding one bucket or the other. And if you choose that fear, it's not less about the comfort that you're giving yourself in the moment, and it's more about what you're telling yourself who you are in the future and who you're trying to become. Are you trying to be someone who's living in fear, or do you want to be somebody who's standing courageously? And I think it's so important to go back and look at those moments that defined us or decisions we made and the current moments and apply that knowledge and wisdom to understand moving forward in order for me to either adjust, maintain, sustain, retain, or change where I'm going. I need to make sure I'm going the right direction when I'm up against that crossword road. And I think the right direction is always going to be fear. I mean, courage. I think it's always going to be courage.
Yeah.
Always.
No, that makes total sense. And if you think about, if we start with what you were saying with courage and fear, we think of it like a spectrum. You know me and the spectrums, right? Everything is a spectrum, right? Where it's sort of, whether it be masculinity, femininity, emotionality, stoicism, right? Stoicism and emotionality. If something is 100% stoic, you're talking to a rock,
right?
But if something is 100% emotional, you're talking to something that lacks rationality, right? So it's that idea of the spectrum. So if we think about that idea of the spectrum of courage and fear, but then what I would then take it to the next level is then what's the action that you take when you're on the spectrum,
Thanks.
right? Where you say, like, if you're right in the middle, that's apathy, right? That's where you do nothing,
right?
That's where you're just like, whatever happens, happens.
Facts.
Right? Like, you don't really have courage in the situation. You're not really fearful of the situation, but you're just kind of in the middle, right? And I think that's an interesting, or in some instances, a terrible place to be. But at least it's the ground of moving towards courage, of what you should be doing in those situations.
Facts.
And if you can think back to the times where you were courageous, you as a defining moment, right? Like, how do we decide when you look back on the defining moments of your life? There are some where you were in fear.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully, those defining moments that you decide to go back to are ones that you said, well, I was on this side of the spectrum and I went to this side of the spectrum. Hopefully. If your defining moments are only ones that are act in fear and stay in fear, then you go into the shame spiral.
Right?
Right. That's the shame spiral, because then you start to feel guilt and shame over not doing something, over the situation of what you could have done or didn't do, or what you did do that puts you into that place, and you was maybe rooted in some type of fear. So then that could be a tough situation. So the overlying idea of what are your defining moments, to then be able to say, okay, I'm going to use the defining moments that are going to help my acceleration through life, that are going to help me go to the next level. So I want to think of my defining moments. If I'm about to go into get onto the field of competition of sport, what defining moment do I want to think about? I want to think about a defining moment where I moved into the spectrum of courage.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Where I got cut from the team. I mean, how many times did Jordan probably think about getting cut from his high school team? But, and what did he need to do to have the courage to be able to do it, right? So the defining moments, in theory, are ones that you want to be able to say to yourself, I went from this state to that state, and this is what was accomplished.
Yeah, he's saying something.
And at the time, I don't know why I was cut from the team, but that goes back to the cornerstone of happening for you, not to you.
Big time.
Right? Had Jordan not been cut from his high school team, would he have become Michael Jordan that we know? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. I don't know. There's a possibility that he didn't, that he doesn't. Had he not had that experience at that point in his life, it may not have ignited him and then created the work ethic that was necessary for him to become one of the greatest players of all time.
Big time.
It's possible. It's quite possible, actually.
It is.
Right? So how do we look at those defining moments to be able to have the narrative and tell the story, but we get to write the narrative? That's the most important part. You get to write your own narrative. You get to write your own story. You're the author of your book, right? So if you want to have multiple chapters in the book, write the chapter in reality, but at the same time, define the moments to say, hey, this when I got cut from this team, I didn't know why it was happening for me as I was going through it. It made sense then. And by looking back and looking at those moments, like you were saying before, now the next time you get cut from the team, You can stay calm through the process,
Right.
right? You can remain stoic through the process. You can understand, okay, I may not know now,
Mm-hmm.
but I will know. And now you can forge forward. And maybe if there was a time in the middle, which you were saying before, when you're talking about fear versus acting bold
Yeah.
versus, and then when you were saying the word before, I thought of another word we can add to that, which is like bold versus shrinking.
Yeah. Shrinking. That's the word that's
Yeah,
what I was
that's
trying to
money,
look
right?
for.
So it's
Yeah.
like,
Shrinking.
yeah, because something we've all been guilty of
Yeah.
that.
I didn't want to say cower. I meant shrink.
Yeah, exactly,
Shrink.
right?
Yeah.
Like you shrink yourself.
Right.
You shrink.
Instead of staying tall.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Your energy, and that's why I think those faith based can look back at the biblical writings of saying being childlike. Children don't shrink.
No.
These are children just walk in a room. Child's like, hello.
Except when they're feeling
Fear
certain emotion.
when they're
Right.
feeling fear, exactly. Then
Pain.
right. So we see the physical adaptation of shrinking a lot of times with them.
Yeah, we kids.
Right, exactly. But as adults, we become
take it
so
as a mirror.
smart
Mm-hmm.
that we shrink psychologically, right? We shrink our energy. We shrink in other ways, and maybe we're able to, play the game of life to the point where we don't show people in the outside world that we're shrinking, but in fact, we're almost doing the same thing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
And I like that idea of the spectrum of like the middle is just freezing. Like you didn't do anything.
Right.
You didn't do anything.
Right.
Right. The person just stayed right there, and they were right in the middle. They didn't do anything good, didn't do anything bad, but they were right in the middle. This fear side is shrinking versus, at the very end, which is then just allowing the world to, destroy you, right? Because you can shrink to the point where you just self-victimize yourself, where you then just become a target.
For sure.
But if you go on the other side where you can make the decisions and courage to say, no, I'm going to have the courage to do this. I'm going to have the courage to say this to that person and let the chips fall where they may. And if we can look back at defining moments where I think the best defining moments are going to be ones that happened where some type of action where we can look and say, at that time, I didn't know why it happened to me. There was something that I needed to get past so that I didn't shrink, that I can go from the fear side of things to the courage side of things. And I think there's an important lesson there, right? Like, how do we decide what those defining moments are? And then how do we tap into them at will? Because then you're cooking with fire.
Man.
Then you're cooking with fire because, you got somebody like a Jordan who would manufacture his own defining moments.
Big time.
Right? He would be like, oh, this person slighted me. He'd push himself knowing that was the pattern that worked best for him. Right? The pattern that worked best for Jordan was chip on his shoulder. From my understanding, right? It makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Where that's who he was. He found that he could fill his tank up by creating that narrative in his own head, right? Of the underdog, of the chip on the shoulder, of they want to see me lose. Not they want to win. They want to see me lose. That's powerful. And he figured that out about himself, from my understanding, right? I've never met Michael Jordan. But from my understanding, and you watch The Last Dance, etc., and you're like, he figured that out about himself, that he was able to see and I'm not saying that this is good or bad. I'm not saying that this is for everyone. I'm just making an observation with what it appears he did when he needed to put gas in his tank. He created a mental enemy, even if that enemy didn't exist. But it helped him. And he would make that person an enemy. Whether it be, and I'm sure he probably had fictional enemies along the way, right? But he was able to do that so that when he was putting in the work, when he was getting on the battlefield, he had an enemy to defeat. And maybe not necessarily because they were competing for the same thing to win, but because they were trying to take from him what was already his. That's some gangster shit.
For sure.
That's some gangster shit.
For sure.
If you can get up and you could be like, oh, I'm already the champion. I just don't have the trophy yet. They're trying to take it away.
I mean, that's powerful, and it that leads me into probably one of my last points on it is, uh, I remember when running, right? Embarked on running just as for extra challenge, and you get to the point to where you start hitting, you meet yourself, right around your ceiling, where that comfort zone is, or where you currently been to. You start to meet yourself, and you start to question, okay, can I do more? And the discomfort and the pain will tell you no, right? Your body is saying no. And so the mental strength comes from every time the weight is a little too much to bear and you say, yes, I can. And it's on you, no, 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 stop, 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 stop. No, yes, I can. And you keep on pressing, yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. And then you get stronger and stronger and stronger by continuing to exceeding that limitation. And I think what the Michael Jordan deal is it's mentally taking those snapshot moments of grit, yes I can, of something coming against you and you fighting against it, right? That you remember and you almost use it as a tool or as your playlist, right? So instead of listening to your favorite artist, you're listening to your mind every time you say, yes I can. Every time you overcame somebody trying to tear you down, every time you corrected the naysayers, every time they said, "Oh, you're not gonna ever play basketball, you're not good enough," you said, "Yes, I am," and you got back. "Oh, you never gonna win nothing, you ain't gonna win a championship." Yes, I did. And so you remember those moments. And I remember every time that I've been trained professionally or I was training myself and I got to the position to where the workload that was still in front of me, I felt was unbearable. And in my body was saying, no, it's no way you can do this. You've never been here before. And overcoming those moments and getting to the finish line and be sitting there like gassed out, completely done, right? I tell my clients when they get to that feeling, I say, we grew today. We got better today. Okay. That feeling right there, that doesn't happen every day. If you can get to that, you got better today because it's not about now you feel beat down. It's about the next time you come up to this limitation, you have now exceeded your current capacity. So this no longer is the top of your ceiling and your threshold because of today and what you did in this moment by letting me push you, getting uncomfortable, getting out of your comfort zone. Now you have now forever now in the future changed your new limitation. So when you come back to the gym and we get to this point, you're going to do what? Be in a better state so you can push past again. And when I'm running, and I'm like, I tell myself, I got 15 miles today, and I get on 8. And I'm like, oh, there's no way. Today's just not the day. My legs tight. I remember the last time I felt that feeling. I go back in my mind to that last defining moment when I was faced with too much to bear and I overcame it. And I take those moments in the past like a playlist, right? And when I'm facing against another challenge and I'm to get to that little mentality of, oh man, this is too much. I think overshot, you know what I mean, the goal today. I remind myself, I felt like this before, and I did it anyway, and I overcame it anyway. Yes, I can. Yes, I will. I'm gonna finish, finish. Right now, the record changes, but the record changes from those moments when we go back and we use those snapshots. And that's major, man.
There you go.
That's major.
You know,
that's major.